Okay, so we are waiting for Ivana to join us, right?
Yes, she's here. You can just start.
Ivana,
yeah.
Ivana and I and myself are going to lead you through this session, and I will start with passing the floor to Ivana to announce our first speaker.
Hello, I'm here. Sorry for this delay. I would like to welcome all of you to our fourth session entitled Redefining Research Assessment. I'm happy to have all of you here. We have more than 600 participants at the conference and from 64 countries. And I hope that next year we will all meet in Zadar. During our session, we will discuss numerous questions, including preprints, peer review, developing research strategies, and in the panel, we will try to answer questions about research evaluation in different countries and in different scientific fields. And we will also talk about national and institutional criteria in professional career advancement and about other questions. In the first part of this session, we will have two speakers, and after that, I will pass the moderation to Vlado for the panel. Our first speaker is Mario Malički. Mario Malički works at the Meta Research Innovation Center at Stanford University. He graduated in Zagreb from the School of Medicine. Then he obtained his MA at King's College in London and his PhD at the University of Split at the School of Medicine. Mario is a co-editor-in-chief of Research Integrity and Peer Review Journal, and I believe that he is the best person to give us the answer to the question from the title of his presentation: how do manuscripts change, and what does that tell us of peer review? Mario, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I hope my screen is being shared and that you can see my slides. Good morning, everyone from the United States. It's almost 7 in the morning here. I know that you've been having a long day, so I'll try to make this as short as possible and focus a little bit on the open peer review aspect of open science, which is currently still the least talked about and least implemented part of open science. Now, when we evaluate researchers, and most commonly we evaluate them based on the publications that they had. However, we don't know how much of the work in those publications was theirs and how many things were changed because of the comments of reviewers and editors. And if those changes are sometimes significant, is it fair that we value their contributions the way we do today? So with my colleagues from both Croatia and Europe and United States, we worked on a project which we call Preprint Observatory. This started way before the pandemic. We did not expect that preprints would play such a huge role during this pandemic. And so when we started this project, we wanted to see, can preprints maybe give us an insight of things that change to manuscripts before they are published, because they would be closest to sharing of submitted manuscripts to journals. And so what we first did, we did a literature review, a systematic review of all the studies that have analyzed changes between either submitted papers or those that were posted as preprints and then the final published papers. We found 21 of these studies. Most of them looked at differences between submitted and published papers. 5 looked at differences between preprints and published papers, and most of them were done in health sciences. On average, these studies included analysis of 60 manuscripts. and mostly had sort of questionnaires which would be filled out for both versions of the documents. For example, questionnaires like reporting guidelines to see if specific aspects of a reporting guideline would have been added during the peer review process of a journal. Now, almost every study used a completely different set of questions and different set of raters and how they analyze things. So a meta-analysis sort of isn't very easy. So I can't tell you exactly of all these manuscripts that we analyze what has changed. But overall, in sort of descriptive terms, most commonly, it's the background and discussions of papers that mostly change during peer review based on these studies. In 2 studies, which were also done in biomedicine, 20 to 30% of manuscripts had additional analyses, and up to 30% had changes in conclusions. Now, if these are very significant changes, this is what I was referring to at the beginning, how important it is for us who assess someone's work to know that this happened in the stage of a publication. Now, we can't really generalize these results because always bear in mind that we have today more than 50,000 journals, and these were only 20 studies, and there's more than 18 billion articles published. So drawing a conclusion for a few of these studies through what happens in every journal is very difficult. So what we did is, again, just a reminder, we did this before the pandemic. We were looking into epidemiology preprints posted on bioRxiv, and then the versions of that were published in journals. Till the end of 2019, there were 622 epidemiology preprints that had only one preprint version and that were later published in a journal. We did a sample size calculation that would allow us to have 95% confidence interval with 8% margins of error to sort of be able to estimate our results or generalize them. We randomly selected the ones we're going to analyze, and then manually, using the Word documents, compare 2 versions of a document sort of option. We looked at each sentence, what was sort of changed, and tried to classify it in a way to see what those important changes were. So just to recap again, so we looked at 121 preprints that were later published in journals. They were published in 73 different journals, most commonly in PLOS or PLOS-related journals. The median impact factor of those journals was 4, which, if we look at sort of closest to a corresponding category, because this belongs to sort of epidemiology, it would seem that these papers that were posted as preprints were published in better quality journal than the average journals of that category, potentially meaning that these are quite actually good articles that were posted on preprint service. Now, I'll go through details of specific changes. I'll skip, we did 20 more outcomes, so I won't go through all of them, but just to give you sort of an insight of things that can change between the 2 versions of a document. We saw that in almost 25% of manuscripts, title had at least some changes. Mostly these were very small changes with 1 letter or 1 word being added or removed. And only 4% of titles had more than 3 words changed within them. Now, if you look at it in sort of, we don't have strict guidelines in science, how should a title of a scientific article look like? But many reporting guidelines recommend that you put a study type in the title. Of these, only 45% included that, and during the publication process, only 2 of these were added. When we look at authorship, on average, these manuscripts had a median of 6 authors, and that did not change. Only 7% had changes in authorship, 5 removed an author, 2 added 1, and 1 reordered the byline order of the authors from the preprint to the published papers. We also found a little mistakes that sometimes preprints would not have, one did not have authors listed, so we contacted the bioRxiv to sort of fix this. And we also saw that 30% of them had shared authorship. In one case, all 6 authors on a paper were designated as equal contributors or sharing first authorship place. Then if we look at the abstract, we can say that 90% of abstracts changed at least a little bit. Of those, around 25% only had what I would call copy editing changes, meaning spelling or typing or adding commas or, nothing that really changes the meaning of the text. One of those examples is, for example, one abstract only had a change where a number of 20,000 was changed to include a comma between the zeros. If we look at the specific sections of the abstract, we can see that percentage is usually smaller than those 90% in total, what I said, the changes. Their backgrounds mostly had copy editing changes, and 12% added new informations in the background or new objectives. In methods, changed around 75% of changes, of which 20% expanded the methods and 8% removed some details. When it comes to results sections, again, most of them were copy editing, and then around 20% added new results, and 6% had different p-values than the ones that were reported in the preprint. And when it comes to discussion, around 30% of abstract added new conclusions or directions in their abstracts. We also looked at authors' contributions, and we saw that authors' contributions are listed most commonly in preprints, in only sort of a third of preprints. But then when it comes to a full paper that is published, it seems that journals' instructions require much more authors to declare what they have done for a specific paper. Most commonly today, there are two ways of declaring authorship contributions. Those are ICMGA style or sort of the credit taxonomy. And we've seen that sometimes even that changes because it is goes in alignment with authors' instructions of those journals. When we look at the introduction of the papers themselves, the average, again, these are epidemiology papers, so it's biomedicine. The median number of words was around 500, and around 30 words are added on average between the preprint and the published paper. Of those that we analyzed, almost 90% all had changes, some kind of changes in introduction. Mostly those changes were included expanding of literature, but 30% actually altered objectives or specified them a bit more. When we looked at methods, method sections are longer than introductions in biomedicine. They, on average in these papers, they were around 950 words, and they were expanded by around 135 words from the preprint to the published paper. 99% of methods changed at least a little bit, and around 30% included additional analysis. I, of course, do not know if these additional analyses were already done by authors before, but just were not reported and then were added when peer reviewers or someone else asked them, but we know that they didn't exist in the preprint version. Of those papers, only 7% had changes to sample size. And I apologize for saying only that could actually be a very large number if we're talking about overall, if this really applied to all studies across the world. When we look at results section, again, on average, were smaller than the method sections themselves. They had an approximate medium of 800 words and would increase around 80 words. Again, these in 95% of cases changed. Most of these changes meaning that they added or removed some of the results, but it was only in 1% that statistical reporting changed, meaning that they added either odds ratio or p-values or something that wasn't, or confidence intervals that wasn't present there before. And when it comes to the discussion, which are the longest sections in these papers, around 1,100 words, they would increase approximately for 180 words. 54% of them added limitations from the preprint to the published version, and 10% had changes in their first outcome sentence. One of those examples is listed here at the bottom. 4% had absolutely no changes in their discussions. And finally, papers usually end with references. And on average, these papers had 36 references, and during the publication process, 6 more would be added. We also looked at, what type of references style is used, but to be short on time, I will skip to that. So what can we say about changes? It's very likely that a lot of things change, and we know that if you're working as an editor or a reviewer, we will often add comments, and those comments will lead to changes in manuscripts. But we haven't agreed in science what and how we classify what are really the major changes and what are the minor changes, and should we as readers know what has changed from the version that was published. What percentage would we as researchers accept to be changed without needing preprints? If we know that so many things change, but we don't think that so many of these changes are significant, would it be okay to just switch completely to preprints and allow 5% of them to be updated to a new version based on the comments that the public or someone else does? So one of the projects that I'm working on, and hopefully will come alive in a year or two, is trying to promote that we declare with every paper published what has changed because of peer review. We have today, often papers have data sharing statements, conflict of interest statements, or similar statements in the paper. And I would like to see a peer review statements published as well, where we would actually list what were those changes that were introduced during the peer review process. This way we would know what it is that are most commonly things commented by reviewers. What do scientists don't know? Why don't we know this? As we mentioned, and in our research as well, mostly literature is being added to introduction. Is it that we're failing to find it? Do we have bad search engines? Do we do, how are we not keeping up to date to literature that we always need reviewers to tell us something that is being happened? How can we prevent this? How can we prevent needing sample size increases or changes in the outcome sentences of the discussion? I think when we know more of what changes, we will be able to tailor education to prevent those changes and make our papers better. Thank you. I hope this was within allocated time.
Yes, thank you, Mario. Thank you for your inspiring presentation. We decided to leave the discussion for during the panel, if you agree. I can see some questions in the chat, but we can answer them later. Our next speaker is Charlotte Wien. She is a full professor of scholarly communication at the University of Southern Denmark, and she is also head of research at the University Library of Southern Denmark. She focuses on researcher integrity and responsible use of scholarly metrics. She is a board member of Spark Europe. And the title of her presentation is Developing and Following Viable Research Strategies Locally. Charlotte, please.
Thank you, Ivana. I'll just try to share my screen here, and I hope you can all hear me and see my screen.
Yes.
You see my screen and you hear me? That's
yes.
Good. And here we go. Yes. Well, thank you for the introduction, Ivana. In these years, academia is facing a crisis. It's manifested by the fact that the public increasingly question our raison d'être, our results and our recommendations. But how did it come to this? In my point of view, the reason is that political winds and changes in the managerial paradigms of the public sector has blown parts of academia off its track. Put boldly, some disciplines no longer produce knowledge to improve society and the living conditions of humanity, but focus on meeting simplistic research production targets set by university management. If we want to regain our position in society and the public trust, we must reverse this development. In my presentation, I will start by lining out the origin of the crisis, using my own university as point of departure, and move on to explaining some of the more general trends in academia. I will argue that these trends have created a series of perverse incentives through the establishment of performance-based measuring systems, and illustrate how these drag researchers away from the classical ideals of research integrity, transparency, and honesty. I will end my presentation by suggesting a new path for research assessment using strategic goal as beacon instead of simplistic quantitative performance. In 2008, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Southern Denmark sent out an email inviting all faculty to participate in a so-called value process. The purpose of the process was to distill 3 key concepts that could reflect the organization. After many meetings, 3 words were agreed upon: trustworthy, innovative, and holistic. The Vice Chancellor had the 3 words printed on a mug, and all faculty and staff received it as a present. Most of us were laughing and cracking jokes about it. We found it ridiculous and a waste of time and money. Over the lunch tables, we discussed and ridiculed the vice-chancellor for this corporate style management and for trying to introduce the same naive and primitive incentive structures that were found in the private sector. We thought we knew better, since we considered ourselves far above and beyond this. We were the well-educated, self-governing, anarchistic, freedom-loving, and absolutely 100% resistant to management faculty. This arrogance reflects how little we understood of the significance of the MOG. The value mark was only one, oh, sorry. There's a bit of noise behind me. I hope you can still hear me. The value mark was one of the first palpable pieces of evidence that new public management were ravaging academia in Denmark. The term new public management was coined by Christopher Hood in 1991. The hypothesis behind it is that the public sector is ineffective, but can become effective if run like a private sector company. NPM is therefore used to describe a set of reforms and management tools that are intended to increase the effectivity of the public sector. Its point of departure is the philosophy of managerialism and neoliberalism. Competition and cost effectiveness are guiding principles. Under NPM, allocation of resources is oriented away from the principles of equity and social justice. Under this regime, sources are channeled to the most effective units. Effectivity is typically measured by simplistic quantitative measures. By 2008, most Danish public sector organizations were already governed in accordance with the NPM principles, but the universities, being notoriously anarchistic, resistant to management and changes, had enjoyed some leeway. When the allocation of resources is oriented to those units that are the most effective, there is a strong focus on the performance measuring systems. They must be simple and transparent so that management can justify allocation of resources internally and use them externally to document for taxpayers, media, politicians, and that production is efficient. What may also have been a driving force in this matter was another general societal development. Like Qvortrup argued in 1998, the emergence of the information society had led to the development of the so-called hypercomplex society. In a hypercomplex society, no one has the full overview. Therefore, a paradox emerges. Observations must be made by many people from many different points. And the more complex a field becomes, the simpler measures are needed to overview it. Research is probably one of the most complex societal activities, wherefore stakeholders outside academia has been most eager to boil the assessment of research quality down to simple numbers like H indexes, citation rates, and journal impact factors. We have failed in establishing proper performance measures, and lacking alternatives to these measures, we have allowed them to influence our daily work, creating a series of perverse incentives. I will illustrate this in a moment. But why did we fail? My point is that we failed because we allowed stakeholders outside academia to establish the performance measuring systems for us. We allowed them to define how to measure us, gave them access and ownership to our data and our products, and in doing so, we gave them control over us. In the following sections, I will pursue these other stakeholders and exemplify how they parasite on academia and undermine its integrity by creating perverse incentives for individual researchers. I will term these stakeholders the para-academic industry. The para-academic industry is the industry that provides different types of services to academia. The services can be targeted either the researchers themselves, university management, or both. It includes the publishing companies, database hosts, professional conference organizers, ranking bureaus, software producers, research infrastructure providers, social media platforms, various research metrics, brands, and so on and so forth. They market themselves by arguing that they can increase the visibility, the performance, the efficiency, or even the quality of either the university as a whole or its researchers as individuals. And since universities are facing constantly increasing competitions about funds, students, and faculty and staff, there's a demand for their services. The last decade has seen an explosion of such privately owned providers of services to academia. They thrive because their customers are tax financed and as such can be considered endlessly rich. The university ranking bureaus is an excellent example. Since the adoption of new public management, universities have been encouraged to compete both nationally and internationally. However, since academic system differs, a series of international ranking bureaus have emerged. These ranking bureaus have created weighted rankings based on a series of indicators like ratio of foreign students, ratio of international faculty, research output, and so on and so forth. All indicators are intended by the ranking bureaus themselves and not grounded in research about what academic quality is. Access to the ranking lists is free and open, but the ranking bureaus are of course not philanthropic non-profit businesses. Their income stems from consultancy services. The service they provide is targeted universities who wants to improve their rankings on one of their lists. A consultant will analyze the profile of such university and describe where the low-hanging fruits can be picked. In this way, the ranking bureaus help those who pay them to improve their own rankings at the expense of those who don't. A visit from a consultant from Times Higher Education costs about €30,000. However, since the indicators of different ranking bureaus are different and cannot be said to reflect one general accepted standard, then this business in many ways resembles the just barely legitimate ways in which criminals in many countries make merchants pay for their dissenting actions by making them choose between being bad-mouthed in the community or paying extortive fines. The fascinating thing is that this money well is bottomless, both because it's taxpayer financed, but also because it never stops. When everybody has paid a consultant to help them identify the lowest hanging fruits and climb the few steps on the ranking, so has everybody else, which is why the university will need to bring another consultant in order to maintain its position. The business model of the scientific publishers is well known too. They receive their raw material, our articles, for free. They make us do the processing, that is the editing and the peer review, for free too, and then they sell our own research back to university libraries at constantly increasing fees and constantly increasing article processing charges. The business has made them unimaginable rich. As many of you probably know, Elsevier Verlag has an annual revenue of approximately €3 billion, of which 70% originates from public sources. With a profit margin of almost 40%, Elsevier Verlag is an efficient machine converting taxpayers' money into shareholders' profits. But what is even more fascinating about the whole thing is that the academic publishing industry has established a system where they both own our publications and the data that are being used to calculate the most generally accepted performance measures like the H-index, citation rates, and journal impact factors. In this way, the academic publishing industry is holding academia hostage. As long as they have both our publication and the data used to assess us, there's no way of escaping. The only thing we can do is to pay our APCs and annual subscription fees at constantly increasing prices. Having created a system so beneficial to themselves, it is hardly any surprise that the publishing industry is not very eager to change anything. To put it short, in its eagerness to support the current new public management paradigm, the para-academic industry has supported the establishment of performance-based measuring systems for research and research assessment that has created a series of perverse incentives for researchers. But how did that happen? To explain this, I need to step back a bit in time. First to 2005, when Jorge Hirsch suggested the simple performance measure for physicists, the H-index. It soon became very popular since it tapped into the zeitgeist's demand for performance measuring systems. What also gave the H-index no momentum was the fact that by the mid-2000s, data for its calculation had become widely and easily available. The grounds for that had been laid 40 years previously when the para-academic industry was in its infancy. In 1964, the linguist, librarian, chemist, and businessman Eugene Garfield had formed the Institute for Scientific Information. Despite its public-sounding name, ISIS was a private company. Its commodity was a series of scientific bibliographies where cross-references were made to cited literature. In the mid-1990s, these bibliographies were digitalized whereby they became a powerful tool for analysis of research production. Over the decades to follow, data accumulated, making inferences increasingly powerful. This was not the original purpose of the bibliography. Ironically, they were created as information retrieval tools for librarians. Today, Eugene Garfield's bibliography is known under the name of Web of Science and is owned by Clarivate. So, from the mid-2000s, performance measures had been established, their data for the calculation was widely available, and the publishing industry was more than willing to sell data subscriptions to the university so that they could document their effectivity internally and externally. Clarivate launched Insight to sell publication and citation data to university management, and Elsevier launched their competing product Cyval alongside with their reference database Scopus. In the beginning, it seemed to work. Standards appeared to be clear, as many In the beginning, it all seemed to work. Standards appeared to be clear. Publish as many double-blind peer-reviewed journal articles in high-ranked journals and get as many citations as you can. When you have plenty, you'll get promoted and tenured. Academic quality had been quantified and converted into simple numbers, and authorships and citation had become the new currency of academia. But where there's a currency, there's also a risk of speculation. I will argue in the following that the academic currency is subjected to speculation in these years. Social psychologists have shown that only 40% of us are completely honest. The remaining 60% of us will cheat if we can. What prevents from cheating is fear of getting caught. Therefore, in areas where chances of getting caught are modest, the likelihood of dishonest behavior is high. Furthermore, dishonest behavior is likely if we have reason to believe that we will gain from engaging in it. Embedded in these dynamics of dishonest behavior is also the need to normalize one's act and to maintain a high self-esteem. The most prevalent justifier is the others do it too, meaning that if an individual believes that his peers are cheating, his inclinations towards cheating increases. In this way, dishonest behaviors are self-reinforcing. The more cheating we think our peers do, the more we are inclined to cheat. In his frequently cited study from 2009, Panellists found that 72% of researchers he had surveyed believed that at least one of their colleagues were guilty of questionable research practices. Of important factors are external locus of control, meaning that if someone outside your organization or your near environment, if someone you don't know or who don't know you perform the quality assurance, then most of us are inclined to cheat. And since we are under constant publication pressure under this paradigm, we rely on quality assessment of anonymous peer reviewers governed by journals owned by companies outside academia. It appears that this normalizer for dishonest behavior is also prevalent. Therefore, the normalizers for dishonest behavior are all prevalent in academia today. Fortunately, a follow-up study by Panellists from 2019 showed that researchers in general have high professional standards and are less inclined to cheating and dishonest behavior than one could expect given the circumstances. Cases of scientific misconduct appear, but is certainly not the norm. However, being confronted with these increasing performance pressures, researchers must constantly optimize. Optimizing is not considered dishonest behavior in academia, but I will argue that much of this is in the gray zone and that the clouds over this gray zone land is becoming increasingly darker this year. Firstly, the average number of authors per journal articles is increasing. Within medicine, we have seen a 5-fold increase over the last century. The reason could be that the complexity of research is increasing. However, most evident points in the direction that the current academic climate makes it advantageous to grant authorships for minor contributions, even as gifts. Because of the current performance assessment system, the same publication counts on all publication lists of the authors. Media has brought forward some quite grotesque examples recently, like when Nature reported on having identified 9,000 authors who claimed to have authored more than 70 papers per year from 2000 to 2016. One of these hyper-prolific researchers claimed to have authored 2,566 papers over these 16 years. In 2015, Nature also reported on a new world record. a single publication having 5,154 authors. There are no rules, only recommendations regarding when and on what grounds to award authorship. But a recent study has shown that 20% of the health science PhD student at University of Southern Denmark has felt an unethical pressures to include other researchers as authors in their work within the last 12 months. And similar results are reported from other Nordic countries. Citations can also be maximized by very efficient and sophisticated, but equally ethically questionable methods hard to detect. Establishing citation cartels is a new trend. A citation cartel can be said to exist when researchers within a community share disproportionately more citations with each other than they do with other groups of researchers working in the same area. It resembles self-citation, but it's harder to detect. A citation cartel differs from citation networks. The latter is used to describe relationship between researchers and papers connected and do not necessarily imply an unethical behavior. The advantage of citation cartel is that they serve two purposes. The first is that they help researchers maximize their citation. The second is that they help editors improve their journal impact factor. For this reason, citation cartels are often established by the journal editors and not the researchers themselves. One informant, however, of one of our studies on a researcher himself, told us that he used an optimizing strategy for improving his H-index at University of Southern Denmark because he always offered the journal editor a co-authorship on his articles. He had discovered that articles where the editor was co-author received significantly more citations than other publications. Summing up, NPM, the performance-based measure, the para-academic industry has led to an inflation of the academic currency. For this reason, we need to establish a new currency. Before suggesting concretely how to do this, I'd like to return to the value mark for a second time. Because the value mark was not a bad idea at all, on the contrary. It was a simple mean giving faculty a shared understanding of where the university was heading. It was part of a larger strategic plan, and as such, it formed a cornerstone of the university's new strategy. And as such, it established a set of counter values for researchers to focus on instead of simplistic performance-based measures like the H-index. But before these values had been rooted in the organization and before faculty and staff had truly understood what was happening, the vice-chancellor was replaced by a more NPM-friendly vice-chancellor who saw no problem in engaging with the para-academic industry. Now that vice-chancellor has been replaced too, so perhaps we can have a fresh start. My point here is that despite the fact that academic business is highly internationalized, it's also important to ground our work locally and to justify ourselves to the taxpayers who finance us. We don't do that by showing them our H-indexes and our citation rates, and if we focus only on what the para-academic industry has defined as indicators of quality. We need to ask people from our local community what their needs are, and we need to show them that we can and will deliver solutions to societal problems. The key to this is strategic work. I will exemplify this through work done at our university. The University of Southern Denmark has an overall strategy with which all sub-strategies must be aligned. It sets the overall direction of the university. Each faculty, each department, and each research group have their own sub-strategy. The lowest level of that is the research units. And since I'm head of a research unit at the library, I will use my own unit to explain how it works. According to our vision statement, the University Library of Southern Denmark is a research-based library. For that reason, we are 3 steps ahead of other research libraries. We practice what we teach, and our research is an example for others to follow. Openness, responsible conduct, and fairness. We have taken the lead in terms of cross-disciplinary innovation, and our research results have proven useful both inside and outside our library. To make this vision of ours a reality, we have defined our core tasks as being to develop and improve the services of the library, ensure synergies between research done at the library and the rest of the university, cooperate across institutional, disciplinary, and geographic distances, develop competences of our colleagues. All members of the research unit have agreed to this and to be measured against these core tasks every year for as long as we have our current strategy. We have operationalized the core tasks for ourselves and defined the standards that we must meet, that every researcher must meet and every new research project must meet. The next thing to do was to define our core tasks operationally so that we could first benchmark ourselves against them and later measure any progress. We managed to find means of measurement for all of them. The interesting thing here is that our researchers find it much more meaningful towards realizing our vision statements and to measure themselves and their performance against our core tasks that are being measured by numbers of publications than being measured by numbers of publications and citations. Also, we experience that the library and its research has become much more visible and accepted both at the university and outside of it in the local community and among our colleagues at other libraries. We still check productivity in terms of numbers of publications and citations, but it is no longer those figures that leads to promotion and races. But the interesting thing here is that even when we measure ourselves against these traditional measurements, they show an increasing productivity. Why? I believe it's because it's much more meaningful to work toward a shared goal, having shared values and not just numbers and indicators as vehicle for getting there. We are not the only one hitting that road in these years. Several Dutch universities like Ghent and Utrecht have abandoned the NPM road paved with publication data in search for a better and much more just assessment of research quality. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I believe that you gave us many answers, but I also believe that we have some new questions. Luckily, we have this parallel communication channel, so just notice that there's an interesting discussion going on in the chat. Okay, thank you. So here is where we finish with our speakers and their presentations, and we will go on with the panel.
Thank you, Ivana. Let me first thank the speakers for setting up the stage for the very efficiently, I would say, for the discussion, the panel discussion we'll have, and that will follow. And let me introduce the panelists first. So we have today Monika Góral-Kurbiel of the National Science Center in Poland, Kristian Vlahoviček of the University of Zagreb, Faculty of Science, Nevena Škrbić Alempijević, also University of Zagreb, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Bertil Dorch, University of South Denmark, and Jadranka Stojanovski, University of Zadar. Thank you all the panelists for accepting to be here with us today. And let me just announce the way this discussion is going to proceed. So every panelist will have about 7 to 8 minutes to say something about the questions that have been pointed out today during the first lectures, but also during the first session in the morning. And the number of questions is long. They are very interesting since we are all hit with this trends in science, in research today. So should research evaluation be based on metrics, or should it be based on opinion of our peers, or should it be something in between? Should the evaluation process depend on its purpose? Should it be different for different purposes? Should there be differences among scientific fields, or should we try to go the same road in assessing the quality? Who should evaluate the research? Should it be the institution, our employer, or should it be some national body? And then assume that they will give us the best criteria for all. What is the experience of different countries? what can we learn from each other. So I will leave the floor to our panelists, starting with Monika, and give you your time, and then after that we'll have a general discussion and tackle some of the questions and also invite the questions from the floor or from the audience. So Monika, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. Welcome everybody. I will share the screen with you as I said. I think I'm sharing the screen with you already. Yes. Today I would like to share with you to tell you very shortly about research projects evaluation process in NCN, in National Science Center. My name is Monika Góral-Kurbiel, and I'm coordinator for physical sciences and engineering in National Science Center in Poland. So just to start and very shortly, general information. National Science Center is a government agency. It was set up in 2011 to support basic research in Poland. And our goal is to improve the quality of research in Poland by means of competition-based system of funding opportunities, but also to further the advancement of Polish research on the international arena. Projects are evaluated in 3 research domains: art, humanities, and social sciences, life sciences, physical sciences, and engineering. All of them are divided into thematic panels. You can see them on the slide. Of course, I'm not going to read them. And we have many calls in NCN. I believe there are more than 30 now. And there are national calls for researchers at different stages of their scientific career, before getting PhD degree, after getting PhD, for advanced researchers, maestro, wishing to conduct pioneering research. So notably for people who got PhD not longer than 12 years ago, and they want to create a new, their own research team, and others. And we have also international calls with bilateral cooperation. So Beethoven, this is the call for Polish-German research projects, Schenk, a Polish-Chinese research project. There is also DINA for Polish-Lithuanian research projects. And Dioscuri, this call is supporting establishment of centers of scientific excellence in Polish research organizations, here organized jointly with Max Planck Society. And we have many others calls with more collaborations, bilateral, trilateral, or more groups involved. There are different, but I want to just underline WIF program for bilateral and trilateral research projects performed in accordance with the lead agency procedure, because here for the first time, NCN is the leading agency. And coming to the review process, generally in NCN, we have 2-stage single-blind peer review process, which, as you all know, means that experts evaluating the proposals, they know the name of PI, but applicants, they do not know names of experts. After eligibility check, we have 2 stages of merit-based evaluation. First, in expert teams, our panel experts, they evaluate proposals based on short description of the project, just 5 pages. Then they decide about short ranking list. And in second stage, proposals are evaluated by external experts in the topic on the proposals. Finally, they recommend proposals for ranking. Usually it takes up to 6 months, with exception of WIF, where it could be even 1 year, and because this is in cooperation with other countries, with other agencies, with lead agency procedure. But coming back to the first stage, it's called qualification check, because as I said already, each proposal is evaluated by 2 independent experts. Experts, they do not know the composition of the expert team before panel meeting, except for the chair. And of course, the most important thing is that experts, they are scientists, only scientists in our panel expert team. And when they finish their individual reviews, they can read them. Then during panel meeting, they agree scores and recommend proposals to the second stage, or of course they choose as well those which are not recommended. During second stage, each proposal is evaluated by at least 2 external reviewers. Those reviewers are suggested by panel experts, so experts from the first stage, and their identity is confidential to internal reviewers, to panel experts. So panel experts suggest them, but they do not know who agreed to review the certain proposal. When external reviews are ready, panel experts, they can again read them, and during panel meeting, they agree scores and agree this time after discussion proposals for funding. We have also some calls where a part of external reviews, evaluation is also based on the interview with principal investigator. Elements in the review form which are evaluated by expert team, by experts from the expert team. These are short project description, as I said, PI's research track record, budget, structure of research team, research plan, data management plan, and ethical issues. And experts should pay attention especially to scientific quality of the research project. This is always the most important. The scientific level of the project, potential impact of the project, feasibility as well. But they also assess the budget. Of course, we give money to scientists. If this budget is not justified, project cannot be recommended to the second stage. There are no negotiations, no modifications of the budget. So budget is either accepted as it is, or the proposal is rejected because of not justified budget. Important here definitely is also assessment of the PI's track record. Scientific achievements of PI are evaluated always in comparison to other applicants, and it should be based on the quality of conducted research, not on the mentioned today by bibliometric indicators. NCN has signed the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA agreement, and as you all know, it says that research quality evaluation should rely on merit-based criteria rather than quantitative metrics. So researchers should be judged primarily on the originality of their research and its impact on the development of the discipline, rather than impact factor of the journal or age index. And we try to do this during our evaluation process. It means that experts, they do not use impact factors, age index during evaluation of scientific achievements of PI. External reviewers during second stage, they evaluate proposals using the same criteria as panel experts, but this is for detailed description of the project with 15 pages, and panel experts then read them, at least 2 external reviews. During panel session, as I said, they discuss and they recommend proposals for funding. Experts should rely on best knowledge, world standards, and today most of NCN panel experts and external reviewers are foreigners. Coming to the end, here you can see, just very shortly, proportion of foreign reviewers. From 2011 to 2020, between those years, we had 80% of foreign reviewers and only 22% of foreign experts. But this amount is lower. This is lower because only these 2 years since we have international experts in our experts teams. And in 2020, reviews prepared by international experts represented 95% of all external reviews. It is important because it helps to avoid potential conflicts of interest, definitely, and improves standards of evaluation up to international level, we hope. And basically, that's it really from my side shortly. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Monika, for your presentation. We could move on to Kristian, for instance. Can you give us your
Thank you, Vlado, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here joining this panel. I was not present from the beginning, so I did not hear the presentations from this morning, but the last two presentations are quite interesting, and some of the findings are quite intriguing, or some of the statements I would find really intriguing, and I would really like to go maybe a little bit deeper in trying to find the answers to the question I got. Let me just back up a little bit and say that okay, I come from a biology background, and in biology there's a paradigm where you have a growth on a petri dish until you basically reach the limit of the resources of the said petri dish, and then the growth stops. And I think this could be quite analogous to all kinds of human endeavor, including doing science in general. And we are in all operating in an environment where the resources are, for better or for worse, to some extent limited to all of us. So I would argue that in this setting and in this environment, it is of our common interest to kind of hedge our bets, or to share these resources with the actions, or with the scientific goals or scientific achievements that would kind of maximize our available resources for that. So I do not see a way to kind of try and self-evaluate us, if you will, simply based on the fact that we would all kind of be very how should I say, subjective of what we do, and I'm sure that we would not be very objective of what our scientific achievements are. So I would argue that some kind of evaluation of scientific activity is definitely in order. You can put it in the context of societal benefits. You can put it in any type of context, but definitely there should be some sort of ranking. What that ranking is, well, this is definitely a subject of debate, and we have heard some of the views on that. Again, this is a very how should I say, hard and tedious tasks, especially for those who have to allocate these resources, governments or the private funds, or you name it, whoever has the money to fuel our endeavor, to fuel our research. They do have to establish some kind of a trust system in order to fund the best research there is. And with that in mind, I would really be interested in hearing maybe a follow-up on Charlotte's presentation, maybe a couple of suggestions on, for example, concrete question, what the promotions and salary raises are based now at the institution that she gave as an example, in order to kind of learn from from examples other than let's say more classical bibliometry-based ones. I think are as human beings based on a system of some kind of trust, and this is not the case only in science, but in any type of human activity and human behavior, and we kind of do need to establish a system where this mutual trust somehow filters out the best among us. And I would argue that this somehow is not entirely possible in rapidly growing activities such as science. We have learned that we have over 1 billion papers published by now, and it is very hard for all of us to kind of follow all that mass of research that is being produced and published, and without a kind of a common system of trust that is, again, for better or for worse, established now with a system that is far from perfect, but at least it's something that we can sort of more or less rely on. I'm really unsure on how would we actually evaluate or value science both on a global and a local scale. We can rely on the community needs to answer some of our questions or to provide some of the directions, but again, the devil there is in the details, and the question is whether communities, be it local or even a bit more global, are sensitive enough to kind of point their interest towards answering huge and big scientific questions that still remain unanswered, and these are the things that now, basically, in my opinion, are pushing the science towards more and more complex approaches and more global approaches, if you will. And I would argue that this is also one of the reasons why we see an increase of authors in publications, because simply more people are jointly working on more and more complex topics. So I will stop there. I have maybe opened up more questions than provided answers, but anyway, my view is that part of the system that we may all be frustrated with, if we kind of try and look at it from the perspective of the policymakers and the decision makers and the resource owners, might make a bit more sense than we would actually give it credit. Thanks. Vlado, your mic is muted.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so what I said was Nevena is coming from the same university, same institution, but a different field of science. From the what would be your views to the questions we asked?
Yes, thank you. First of all, many thanks to organizers for inviting me to take part in this panel. As I come from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Zagreb, my role in this panel will be twofold. On the one hand, I will try to cast additional light, along with the previous speaker, on the evaluation processes in the Croatian context. On the other, I will try to talk from the specific perspective, as you pointed out, of humanities and social sciences. I think this position is worth exploring, especially because there is a rather long tradition of analyzing and challenging the evaluation criteria for humanities and social sciences in the Croatian context, but also within the European research area. One of the main objections of researchers and institutions coming from those disciplines is that humanities and social sciences are too often measured against the STEM fields, and their specific features are not taken into account in research evaluation to a great extent. One of the blatant examples in Croatia was connected to defining a national policy for the appointment to scientific grades in 2013, that in its draft version sent to public consultation outlined the same requirements for all the scientific fields and incorporated the list of the databases and international publishers that were inadequate for SSH fields, as I would refer to social sciences and humanities. After a lot of engagement of experts from those fields, that draft was modified, luckily, and nowadays the policy defines separate standards for each scientific field. So there are also separate standards for social sciences on the one hand and humanities on the other. However, the current document is still far from ideal in recognizing and fostering the specific features and strengths of SSH fields. Namely, there is a gap between what is necessary for the appointment to a scientific rank at the national level and what is expected and encouraged within certain disciplines. The imperative to publish as much as possible in the English language in order to achieve international outreach sometimes goes against the need to make research results related, for instance, to Croatian society, cultures, and language accessible to wider reading audiences in Croatia and hopefully stimulate some positive social changes. Also, in the evaluation process, edited volumes have very low relevance, and from that position, they could be considered as a waste of researchers' time, whereas within our disciplines, thematic edited volumes are crucial for developing certain research areas, and very many of us have such publications in our course literature lists. Furthermore, there is a discrepancy between the journals that bring additional points in evaluation process and those that are considered highly relevant within certain disciplines. Let me give you one example from my own field. I'm an ethnologist and cultural anthropologist, and as many of my colleagues in Europe, I like to publish my works in Ethnologia Europea journal, because I know that in that way I will reach a very wide academic audience. However, that journal is not included in some databases that are considered top rank because the editors, as they have stated, refuse the dictate of international databases. So my colleagues and I, in our individual publishing plans, navigate between what is needed to reach a higher scientific grade and what is acknowledged and visible in our own fields. We witness the tendency, which I find a very logical one, but not an especially good one, that more and more researchers adjust their publishing preferences and practices to the national policy rather than to what is considered the quality standard within their research areas. In Croatia, the evaluation for getting a scientific grade is based on the national policy and largely based on metrics and not on peers' opinions. The main argument for such an approach is that we are a relatively small academic community and that it is hard to secure an impartial evaluation that avoids the conflicts of interest. That approach has some advantages, as we have heard previously. It outlines the same criteria for everyone and lists the concrete requirements for a certain rank, and therefore it leaves the impression of objectivity. On the other hand, it also makes the evaluation process extremely formal, since it is based to a great extent on enumerating the number of books, published articles, calculating the ratio of text published in English, etc. One of the criteria for assigning points to a certain text is its length. That is the exact number of characters in the text. In some cases, that results in the phenomenon that some of my colleagues colloquially call measuring texts in kilograms, which means that the size becomes one of the main norms. Avoiding redundancy and getting to the point is not a value that is promoted in such system. Generally, in that model, the qualitative analysis is placed in the background. It is true that qualitative overview of the published works is an integral part of the appointment reports, but they are far from being the tipping point of whether a person will fulfill the requirements or not. The next problem I would like to address is the criteria for evaluating the place of publishing. In the assessment policy, there are lists of journals published in Croatia that are considered A1 or international level journals and A2 national level. However, there are no clear criteria for evaluating journals published abroad. Unlike social sciences, humanities are not obliged to use international scientific journal rankings, so that the assessment is largely left to individual interpretation of commissions selected at the institution and then to field committees that are established at the national level. Also, there are no clear guidelines in our evaluation procedures on how to assess authors' monographs, what is an original work and what is a review, how to differentiate scientific from professional books, etc. An additional problem is that the ways of defining the original scientific contribution of a book vary a lot in different fields, so it is hard to set the same norm for all the SSH fields. That is especially the case when it comes to the treatment of the publishing of previously unpublished sources. Some disciplines would highlight the scientific contribution of such publications. Others would treat those only as materials for further scientific analysis. I will close my comment by referring to an issue I find very important, and that is the question of open science. I'm sure that very many researchers would endorse that concept of making scientific research publicly known and widely accessible. But again, in practice, ideals are sometimes adjusted to publishing realities. In order to access texts in certain highly ranked journals, one has to pay fees or subscriptions. In social sciences, as well as in many other fields that base their assessments on the international scientific journal ranking system, publishing, for instance, in certain Web of Science journals comes at a certain cost. That factor casts a different light on economic imbalances among different academic communities, as well as among researchers employed in different institutions or those in precarious positions or not employed at all. That perhaps shows that our sciences are not as open as we would think or like them to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Nevena, for giving us an insight from a different side, and especially in yes, the evaluation through books and evaluation of researchers publishing mainly in local language. Bertil, can you give us your view of the problem?
I'll try. I hope you can hear me. Also, I have 2 slides that I don't know if I can share them, but I can try, and if I can't, I can just read them instead. So let me just see whether it's possible to do that. Just a second.
I think you can share the screen, yes.
I don't know if you can. Can you see? Yeah, can you see anything now?
No, not.
No. All right. Then instead, I'll just show myself here and just read to you. So, well, basically, so I'm a library director and an associate professor in astrophysics, and basically, I do not have much to add, I think, to what Charlotte and others at the panel has already already said, but perhaps I'll say it in another way. So if you imagine just a slight note, first note on quantum mechanics, imagine a cat in a box. I suppose that some of you are familiar with that picture. So as you may know, in quantum mechanics and at the micro level of the world, any state is a superposition of all possible states. But also in quantum mechanics, if you make a measurement, you collapse all these possibilities into just one state. And I think that something similar is actually an effect in research assessment. So basically, my point of view here is that when you assess, you shouldn't measure unless you want to change something. But then you need to know what to change, and more importantly, you need to know why and to what you want to change it, unless you risk unwanted and even perverse effects, potentially also misconduct. So my viewpoint here is that when you do use quantitative metrics, I'm not saying that you shouldn't assess anything, but when you use quantitative measures, you should really be careful and think about what you want to do. You need to merit these metrics. So generally the metrics, in my opinion, that we implement do not have any scientific merit, the ones that we use currently. Sure, the consequences are studied, and we have seen examples of this today also, that we study the consequence of using these metrics, but they are born out of management, not any scientific reasoning or method. The analysis is, but not the measurements themselves. So the experience that we have seen today, and then you probably know of, that you have to take great care in order not to introduce unwanted, unethical behavior that can infringe potentially the freedom of research and also the quality of research. So of course, gaming is natural. People want to live up to the expectations. And sometimes you have these perverse or bad incentives when you play the game that were unwanted and unforeseen at the beginning. Another observation that I think when you do measurements is that like metrics, the more complicated they are, the harder they are to game. And hence they can reduce the effectiveness of both gaming and the perverse incentives. So in a way, they're more honest. So if you really want to do quantitative metrics, they should not be easy to game at all. They should be complicated. If you want to show the actual picture and not introduce changes, because if you wanted to introduce changes, they have to be simple and easy to understand. But then you need to know what the kind of changes that you want to have, what they should be. So my kind of message is that when you develop new or innovative metrics, for instance, to reward open science, which is the context here today also, you should take care not to introduce any unwanted behavior. So you need responsible metrics, of course. I think most people can agree to that. So I think that new measurements or new metrics should be really a scientific enterprise, like developing a drug or building a bridge. That is something that has to be constructed to be fit for purpose. So you need a purpose and you need to build it in a way that it's fit to that purpose and not to something else, or not even to something that you don't know what is. So assessment should have a scientific basis, and perhaps then we need a interdisciplinary theory in order to have this development. So that's just a few words that I have, but I have lots of questions for the speakers and also for the other panelists, but I'll just rest for now.
Thank you, Bertil. So basically what to say is that the way we are being measured, or our research is being measured, should really depend on the purpose of the measurement and not be just one mechanism for all purposes.
Yes. So okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll give you the stage later to set your questions, also to pose your questions. Jadranka, can you give us 5 minutes on your thoughts?
Yes and no. So it's really difficult to say
I cannot deal
something.
with this answer.
Sorry?
I cannot deal with this answer. It's either yes or no.
Yes, this
joking,
is
right?
such an
The floor is yours.
interesting session, and I prepared some few slides, but I don't dare to put my slides on the screen now after such a great talk and discussion, and everyone sounds to me much more interesting than I'm interesting to myself. So actually what I wanted to suggest, and that's important for me, what I wanted to suggest, and that will be my 1 minute contribution. If you agree, it's really pity that this session just ends in a few minutes without any output and results. So if you agree, I understand perfectly that we don't agree about everything. So we have different opinion, and that's the beauty of all discussion. But could we maybe agree on a piece of documents, maybe 1 or 2 pages, which will we organizers deliver to our ministry, Croatian Ministry of Science and Education, and our agency, Croatian Funding Agency, and just to see how they react to our proposal, because the research assessment system in Croatia is so, there are many wrong research assessment systems, of course, and but in Croatia it's so deeply wrong, and it's on the other side it's like I have a feeling that it's yes embedded, yeah, not embedded, and engraved in stone, and from my perspective I don't see any chance to be changed soon. But maybe we can just drop them a short piece of paper to maybe someone will read, maybe someone will start to think, and I really believe that we need to start doing some pressure on our policymakers in this sense. I know that we are a small scientific community, and everyone is actually arguing that it's not possible to introduce in Croatia any kind of qualitative research assessment and something like that, because we are small community, and everyone know each other, and that's not possible. And for the end, so I hope that Vlado, you will support me as a chair of this session, and that we will write together some short document. And if I have 1 minute more, do I have 1 minute more? So I want just to remind us of what we need to promote. So we really need to promote diversity. So I will say nothing new, everything was mentioned before, but we really need to take into account the whole range of possible research outputs, not only publications. So I asked Mario before, but I was not obviously clear enough. After Mario's excellent presentation, I asked me, of course, the focus of the study was different, but did they find out, looking for changes in during peer review process and editorial process, do they find out that this way how we are communicating our research results? You need to have in mind that in some disciplines you are doing research for 2 years or more just to produce 10 pieces of paper, which will be rejected or accepted or changed 30% during peer review process. We need to start to think about different formats, forms, media, and everything to communicate our research results, and we need to take everything into account when we are doing research assessment. And yes, and I'm speaking a lot, and I will conclude with this, with the transparency. So the only way we can do this, these changes in the future, really working, is having 100% transparency of everything, all the research process and the research data, underlying research data behind the publication. Peer review process must be completely transparent. Of course, enabling peer reviewer to stay anonymous for whatever reason, but the reviews must be publicly available. And if we make, and of course, research assessment system must be fully transparent. It's really interesting when Mario discussed how at his institution, Stanford, it is not known actually which, according which set of criteria you will be evaluated. And that's really pity, because it's really important. And in the documents of European Commission is stated, if you that researchers must be skilled in the all criteria according which they are evaluated. And if we are changing criteria, then we need to invest in training of researchers to adopt and to learn more about this new criteria. So full transparency and a lot of diversity. That's my final message. Thank you.
If I can say just one thing based on this, what Jadranka can say, I also have to make, there's a very clear difference between private universities in which I'm here right now and the ones in many countries. Stanford has the money to promote everyone they want, from the assistant professorship to the full professorship. So every hired person can climb the ladder if they meet the requirements. That is often not the case in public universities, because we are limited by the number of coefficients, or however we want to call them, but basically the amount of money that professors can have, or the number of professors you can have. And that's what's limiting us a lot. People are sometimes, even when they have requirements, waiting in line because they need someone else to retire before they can take their position.
Yes, but that is the fact in most universities. Actually, I would say a university like Stanford is an exception in this. We now have time for general discussion. Maybe if you allow me to start the discussion with a question to Charlotte. Listening to you, probably my only question was, do you need a professor in biotechnology?
Charlotte is not here. She had difficulties.
Had to log out, so she's not here with us.
Ah, Charlotte is not here. Yeah. Okay, so.
But it seems to me that Bertil is eager to say something more.
Bertil is here, so my question would be regarding your university. It looks perfect, and I would really like to work at an institution like this. The question is, what happens when your colleagues try to compete for European projects, for instance? They will basically, in the real life, not be asked whether they have solved some societal problems. They would be asked of the age index. And so what is the attitude there?
So first of all, I mean, Charlotte was speaking about the university, the research library research department, yes, not the whole university. But of course, there are some things that can be said there. So, for instance, when it comes to the age index, we have a service at university where you can get your H-index calculated. So, for instance, when the departments, they do evaluations, or you have discussions about hiring people, there is a procedure of how you can calculate your H-index, and the library is actually part of calculating that. And for that, there are many different things involved, but one of them is discussing with the researcher who is the object of the calculation. Is it correct? And what papers are included here? Are something missing? What are the data set used to do that calculation? So what we do when for instance, looking at the H-index, which is a demand that's very hard not to address, because it's embedded in academia in some parts that you're expected to have an H-index. But what we do is that we do the H-index calculation or evaluation together with the researcher. So they are formally included also in, and have an opportunity to say that this is not a justifiable kind of metric for me based on the data that is available or data is missing. So that's one way of trying to answer your question. But of course, when you go out into the individual departments and institutes and centers, the disciplines have different cultures about how they look at that. But we attempt to have a uniform way of addressing it centrally in the university. So I don't know if that answers at least some of your question.
Yes, thank you. This is what I wanted to ask. You have some criteria that you use at your own university, but then if your professor goes out and wants to compete for an international project, these criteria will not be applied. So
that makes a difference between, so it's in competition, but what our professors will have, they will have actually a report describing how their H-index is calculated if they want to use it. Yeah.
You mentioned you had some questions, and so please.
Yeah, so is Mario here? Oh, you're there.
Here, yes. Great,
because I found it was an extremely interesting project that you described. The question was to remind everybody what had changed after peer review, and you listed some of the things that changed. And of course, what is often said about peer review is that sometimes, or the experience that people highlight when they have been subjected to peer review, is that the paper has not become better. So my paper was destroyed by the peer reviewer, and they wanted me to change this, and I changed it in order to have it accepted. So that's one of the things that I was wondering whether you can see that. So you mentioned, of course, that the papers are submitted in some journals that supposedly are good journals, but have they actually become better? So have they become more readable, more relevant to the readers? And so that's one of the questions. I have a related questions, because another one it's more maybe related to that, but that you mentioned that the references sometimes changed. About 6 references in average or something like that was added. So another question, of course, related is references to whom? And I'm hinting here that there could be some kind of integrity question also.
Absolutely, yes. So in our research, I can't answer your questions, but I can point you to studies that have done that. So we weren't looking at it for specifically. We know paradoxically that from big surveys from PubLons or Global State of Peer Review, that more than 80% of researchers are actually satisfied with peer review, despite we mostly hearing about negative cases. But we also know from other surveys that more than 50% of authors say that they have made the changes just because they thought that they wouldn't accept the papers otherwise, not that they think that they improved the papers. Again, bear in mind, 4 million articles per year, we would really need to have constant surveys to evaluate this and have better data. So we don't know that. When it comes to citations, again, we did not look at this because I did not have access to peer review reports. So I couldn't check, did the editor ask or the reviewer asked, and I would only be making assumptions if it is. But there are studies that have looked at that, and one of ours is also looking at that. And we do see that in some journals have been published, around 50% to 20% are self-citations. Not to exclude those, every year 30 to 40 journals that get excluded from Web of Science or Scopus because of citation manipulation, either increasing citations of their own papers from their own journal or having agreements with other journals that they will cross-cite each other and therefore inflate their citation numbers. So there are all these practices that of course do happen. But again, I think that that's where the open peer review transparency would help. If we would see that the editor is asking these, and if we could, automatically check. And I know that there are now artificial intelligence doing exactly this, that they're going to check if the added references are those from the editor or from the reviewers during the process. I think Jadranka has a question.
Yes, I just want to follow Bertil's questions. And you mentioned at one moment that at some percentage authors alter their objectives. So
we cannot know
just a second. I can't understand, because objective is something you are creating before research process starts. And if we consider article as a way of reporting on your finished study, so how it's possible that in reporting you are changing something which should be defined on the very beginning of the research?
That would work in ideal world where we actually pre-registered what we planned to do and then can compare it. But as I also said, we had 7% of papers that increased sample size. So which means that after they submitted a paper, the reviewers asked them to get more patients or more whatever they were analyzing and do the different analyses. So when you do, you also get a new objective that you may be doing some subgroup analysis or something like that. That's why they change. The other reason why they change is because often they're not clearly listed, or they focus only on those that are significant p-values wise or something else. So, they may say that they plan to do this, but then they say, no, actually we did this because this is the only thing that came out to be true. And I think that thing we can only fight if we register our planned analysis at the start.
Thank you, Maria.
Vladimir, Charlotte is back, so maybe you want to ask her the question you had.
You are muted, Vlado.
Sorry. Let's zoom. You already answered the question. So, Ivana, do you have any questions from have you been able to extract any questions from the chat that was going on?
Yeah, it is really hard to choose because there are so many questions and answers.
Yes.
I think that Mario answered most of the questions, and Charlotte also. So
it is a sort of a parallel discussion running in the chat.
Parallel universe. There is a question about shall we have the whole chat somewhere available after the conference? But
okay, I think it's possible. Yes. If you can look at the chat and see if you can find the interesting questions. In the meantime, I have a question to Monika. You mentioned you try to evaluate, or you try to introduce systems for evaluation of principal investigators of your project, of your project proposals, not through metrics, but rather through the merit of their science. How much does the overall rating of the project depend on the quality of the PI?
Depending on the call, really, it varies between like 10% up to even 35%, depending on the call. Like in Opus, for example, which is a call for everybody, it's 35%. For Maestro, for the very for researcher, with high scientific achievements and with big stage of their scientific career, it's more. But for those who are at the early stage of their career, like with PhD students after 2 years after PhD or something, it's much lower. Like it's like 20 or 15%. So everything depends on the call. It's not the same for all calls.
So this was a part of the question. If you have a call for young researchers, then they do not have any particular achievement so far, and you still have to.
So yes. So the weighing of this criterion is lower than like scientific achievements. Yes, much lower. But it's not really that easy to introduce this. Evaluating without metrics, because we can see also that experts are very used to use metrics, but they became more and more easy with that, I would say, with time, with more panels, with more reviews. But very often we hear something like, "Oh, I know I'm not allowed to speak about impact factor or age index, but his age index is such high as." So it means that we know very well that in criterion for scientific achievements we have to evaluate this person very high. So it not always works as good as we wish, but we are trying, and I hope we are on a good way.
Okay, thank you. Do we have other questions? Oh, I have other questions.
Here's one interesting comment. Maybe I can read it from chat. Mario wrote the comment. It has been very strange that the only way we can hire young researchers is if we get funds from EU or national funding agencies. And of course, then they go when the project ends, and there is no sustainability there.
Yes, but hiring young people are dependent on the research project. So, Mario, what would be the alternative?
Well, one of the alternatives I suggested was the one that medical health agency did for medical students and medical doctors. You have a national call, and then the ministry assigns the young researcher who they've judged to be best, like we do to students. Students do an entry exam. Too many selections are allowed to professors to choose the people they want to work with, skipping other researchers. We don't know when the calls are going to be. Every university gives you maybe 7 days to submit all the documents because they already often have a targeted person they want. It is not a public call like for a university that happens on a specific date so that all researchers in a country can prepare to apply for that one. It is a very played game for young people to get that.
Yeah, I see.
As we are talking about public institutions, these are not private universities where you get to pick who works for you or a private company.
No, I think it's much clearer with the private institution. Private institution is private, and the owner has the freedom of running the strategy of the institution, but the public universities have to have a different system. It's clear. Nevena, do you think what bothered me always was particularly with some of the humanistic areas where you publish in native language? So who is going to evaluate a researcher whose main scientific opus is in Croatian, for instance, except of his own colleagues and people who are perhaps having a problem with the conflict of interest? Yes,
well, that is of course a very good question, but on the other hand, perhaps I would like to twist your question a little bit. Is that a plea not to publish in Croatian and results related to Croatian languages? Of course, that is for each country, for each culture, that is a highly relevant aim to promote the languages, the diversity of languages, and in a way, perhaps to avoid the imperative of publishing only in what is called world languages, known to everyone. So that is, of course, a relevant question, but in the answer to you, there are actually quite a few people who speak Croatian across the globe. So I think there is an area for objectivity. So I think that being from the same language is actually not suggesting some kind of subjectivity, or especially not a request not to do it. I think that is actually something we should promote. Diversity, as Jadranka put it.
Okay, yes, that would be, theoretically it would be fine. In practice, I think we have many obstacles, and
I agree, but on the other hand, we have heard a lot about objectivity here. And my dilemma is to which extent one can be objective if we are members of certain academic communities that are, again, limited, even if they come from other countries. Very many people of my background know me in Europe. So why would it be they be more objective to my work than somebody from Croatia, for example? So I think there are a lot of questions open there, and well, that is perhaps a question or a continuation of what Mario was pointing out. I totally agree. We need to move this process perhaps a bit more further from totally personal relations, but on the other hand, is there a guarantee that a national process is objective and impartial? Again, there are always people deciding there, and we, when we are thinking about the system, we think about, the machinery that is going on in a very impartial and objective way, but from our own experiences and lives, we know that is actually not the way it is done.
Yes, thank you. This is really true. This is something we all know from the process of evaluation of our own project. Kristian.
We also see that maybe in grant awards, if you look at how things are done across the European Union. In the UK, the ministry gives money to the university, and the university gets to decide which researchers within their university they're going to give funds to do research. While as in most other countries, you apply to the ministry and they select the projects and give you the money for them. So it is, again, which we trust to be more objective. Do we believe that our dean or people at the university would value you, or would you have to have stronger connections, or would that ministry make that decision more objective? And I think the same applies for selecting of people. In our PhD defenses, we require an external evaluator from not your university to also judge the candidate. We don't require an external evaluator for the person you're going to hire. Why? Why is the PhD award different than selecting an assistant or a tenured professor?
Exactly. So what you want to say is the question is who actually is in charge of taking care of the quality assurance at an institution? Yeah. Is it the institution itself, or is it somebody outside the institution?
Because when we get our scientific degrees, we outsource them to the ministry. But we don't outsource hiring of the personnel to them. We approve them and then ask them to approve them, but it's not the same process. It's not the one who gives it. And I think there are many ways that we can, of course, approach this. I'm not saying one is better than the other. And that's why I mentioned lottery systems are being explored in some countries when they're doing that for students as well. When there is a threshold, you don't know. What we gain the system in too many ways.
I see. Okay. What I wanted to ask Kristian is to be a sort of a devil's advocate. If you look at the metrics on one side and the holistic approach on the other, the metric seems so much easier, so much more simple. Do you think there is a possibility to improve the metrics and to invent the sort of a better metrics that would then improve all the weaknesses of today's system, and will still be simple and involve all the activities of a researcher, and you get not an age index but an X index, which would be definitely the best thing that reflects our career, or is it the wrong way at all?
No, so okay. I mean, I think there may be a lot of oversimplification in our views here, and the way we kind of set the stage now. It is none of the science evaluation systems actually rely on a single criterion. You did mention that I don't know, for EU you need to have an H index. It never is so, and it shouldn't be so for good purpose. And definitely there is a mix of quantitative and peer-reviewed evaluations that actually do provide the best results, and should and are in any case used throughout. Relying on a single system of those is, if you go the peer review way, this is simply unattainable, unproductive, especially in environments like our environment. There is no feasible way to peer review everyone in an independent and impartial way, and I will bet you on that. Financially, this is impractical. Our National Science Foundation struggles to find paid reviewers to review our grants. So this is going in one direction. It is completely impossible. Going in another direction, of course, oversimplifying the system down to a single number is never a good idea. And I do not know a single person who advocates actually that. So I think we may be really oversimplifying if we claim that everybody just wants to boil us down to a single number like H index or whatever. Regarding the development of new indices, yes, and also I think Bertil touched on that, that the scientists should do that, and in fact scientists are doing that. And then you have areas of science developing scientometry methods and approaches, and trying to come up with criteria that kind of model the real world in a better way. And I think this is what we should kind of strive to do, to have a system that would represent the real world better. We in several addresses we touched on, what should be the criteria for this, what should be the criteria for that, and there are many opposing views here for sure. What Mario gave as an example of voucherizing the system of hiring, practically going to the ministry for getting a position, as opposed to the selection of people by the principal investigators. I would argue, for example, Mario, that in an ideal world, these two things should kind of converge to the same system. And this is just a matter of who you trust more. At the moment, maybe this is the system in Croatia is that you trust the central authority more. In a different, maybe more in a different society with maybe more experience in doing science, like the UK, the trust has been established at the level of institutions, and the government knows that they can trust the institutions to perform a good job in selecting the candidates. And I think we have a lot to work on that in our local setting, and try to reestablish the system of trust. But again, it will be very hard for us to do if we keep, and this is what we do, if we keep asking ourselves how good we are, and there is no way out of that, for sure. So Vlado, just maybe to reiterate on the answer, both approaches are valid and should be valid while evaluating something. Moreover, I'm very much in favor of for example, the UK system, where the trust has been established at the level of the institutions. and the government does not really have to micromanage either people or departments or grants or whatever. And the institutions do have a good way of performing their societal duties and selecting the people to do that. And again, we boil the system down to some kind of scientific evaluation that is often represented by the model provided to us by different metrics.
Okay, thank you, Kristian. Yes. Charlotte had a question, but had to leave. So I propose that since we are out of time now, and we started about 15 minutes later, and so it's about we have consumed the time foreseen for this session. I have two suggestions. One is to continue this communication and this discussion through emails and other communication screens. And the other one would be to accept the Jadranka's proposal and to try to write a document, sort of a declaration type document, if you want. If we decide to do this, we'll send you all this document to and ask you for your contributions in the text. And if there are, is there any other question you would like to ask at the end of the session? Ivana, anything from the chat?
No. In fact, there was a question for Charlotte, but she's not here. But okay, maybe we can. I can read the question and let it be open question and unanswered. The question is by Iva Grabarić-Andonovski. Do you think that there is room for optimism, and can we turn the wheel? Will we step out of APC and impact factor? So I think that we don't have time to answer all those questions, but
we would all like to know the answer to this question.
Yes.
Okay, knowing anyway. Charlotte, answers on both questions would be yes. So yeah. He's optimist all the time. So.
Okay. Yes.
I would second that as well. Despite all my negative, possibly half negative comments, I'm extremely optimistic. I think that the world is much better than it was decades ago, and that we will do this better. But it's, of course, some generations will suffer a bit more till we get it right.
Okay, yes, thank you, Mario. I think we can conclude with your thoughts, and I thank you all for contribution at the session, and I wish you all the interesting meeting. I hope the meeting will be interesting for you tomorrow during the sessions and talks, and also there is a way to contribute in the panel discussions tomorrow as well. There are several very interesting panel discussions at the program. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Goodbye.